So here we are again. Yay! And this time it's blue because, blue. And so here we are. This is like part one of like a million, in which we're going to be looking at the social, political, and economic obstacles that the Weimar Republic faces. So we've got a constitution in place. We've got a governmental structure in place. And now we're going to look at the challenges to that and how they dealt with it, and kind of like to help us understand possibly why things may not, I know, have worked out for Weimar. And our learning outcomes is, so basically what you want to be able to do after we finish talking about this, or rather after I finish talking at you about this, is understand some of the various challenges. So the idea that challenges were coming to the Republic, were coming from all of these different ends, or from these different directions, and how the government responded to these, right? And then looking at the basically the tension between the challenges and the response, and how those then would have had an impact on the future success. As we know, spoiler alert, things did not work out. So how that those things could have impacted the whole not working out thing. Okay, so political instability. And so now we get to the meat and potatoes of it. So we're looking at some of the political issues. And one of the first things to pop up is this ideological opposition. And unfortunately for Weimar, the ideological opposition was coming from a number of different directions. Basically, they almost couldn't fail for trying. All right. So one, we have opposition from the left. Oh, the left, the left. Be fearful of the left. And so basically the Communist Party was really, really angry after the Spartacist Revolt. We'll talk about the Spartacist Revolt later on. And there was hardcore repression. There was hardcore murders being done. And then the Communist Party was like, you ain't seen nothing yet, all right? We hotter than hot here. But, in German. And so again, the murders of the party leaders really upset them. And so what the other thing is that they were connected to the Communist Party in Moscow. One of the things that we know is that from looking at Russia is that at this time, they were actively, so Lenin was actively trying to foment revolution, communist revolution in other parts of Europe. And the idea is that this is then going to help the communist revolution in Russia succeed. And so this is going to be very problematic, or this is going to be one of the reasons why the Communist Party is not accepted, because in a very real way it wasn't homegrown. And so basically the Communist Party from the very beginning, they're working to consolidate their power to get more votes. But they had no real influence with the trade unions. So that was one of the things that kind of left them unable to gather as much support. And so eventually, so basically the Socialist Party had more influence with the trade unions. And the communism, the internationally influenced communism in Germany, and the domestic social democratic party really couldn't get along. They were ideologically opposed to each other, and which ultimately left them unable to unite to fight the Nazis, to present a united front against Nazis. And so it's like, divided we fall, and divided fell. So it's coming from the left, and it's coming from the right. So you have the nationalists who wanted a more authoritarian Wilhelmine Germany, Oh, I wrote Wilhelmine, but never mind. I'm gonna fix that. So they want a more Wilhelmine Germany that is very centralized control within an aristocracy. Because that was the thing. Within the empire, you have a very powerful aristocracy, and they essentially lost their control. And then at the same time, the nationalists saw that essentially the country was falling apart, and these guys were the failure. They made the whole empire thing fall apart. That made a whole lot of sense. And so the nationalists have a crap ton of support from the civil service. These are the people who basically kept the country running, right? All of your bureaucrats, and a lot of these people received their positions during the during the whole empire, the authoritarian control, and they wanted things to continue as they were. And you can say the same thing about the legal system. And this is the thing, is that like whenever you may have a governmental change, but this was not like a sweeping revolution in the way that they like got rid of everything top to bottom. And because they're not able to like kill everybody, because that usually killing everybody usually doesn't work in a democracy. They weren't able to get rid of everybody. That meant that the institutions that had been in place under the Kaiser are still in place. And that's good because it allows that continuity, but that's bad if these guys don't agree with the changes you're making, right? And we know churches, very powerful, are the Catholic Church, generally in the northern part of the country. So Catholic Church and the Protestant churches, and I lie. Yeah, no, never mind. But I'm probably lying anyway. And of course, the industrialists who were afraid of changes in the system, like people getting more rights as trade unions became more powerful. And if workers can vote, then workers are going to vote in their favor and against the industrialists. So again, these are all of the people who have a vested interest in not seeing the old system change. And then in the 1920s, the nationalists, in the late 1920s, as the Nazis, the National Socialist Democratic Workers' Party, yeah, something like that, whatever. Just make it up as you go along. The Nazis basically took over because the Nazis had that nationalist thing as well. And the Nazis also had this sort of like firebrand. They were able to pull people in. And so essentially the nationalists saw that their interests aligned more with the Nazis, and they joined or passed sort of like the torch over to the Nazis to keep the nationalist fire alive. And then we have the rise of numerous Volkisch race-based political groups, of which the Nazis are one. One of the things you have to kind of understand is that this isn't just like, oh, it's the rise of the Nazis. We tend to focus on them for obvious reasons, but they weren't the only one. There were a lot of these that were focusing more on the German people, right? So it's part of that nationalism, but also it has that added dimension of being race-based as well. We have these pushisms, this whole idea of violent uprisings or coups. So there were a number of these. We'll talk about a couple of them, but there were a number of these that kind of challenged the state's ability to, maintain the state and maintain control over civil society. And then you have paramilitary groups. So these are groups who, I don't know, just get out in the streets and go and fight and stuff. And so these were largely associated with these race-based Volkisch political groups, and they are fighting each other. The communists have their own people that they send to the streets. These race-based groups have their own people that they send to the streets, and everybody was throwing down. It was kind of like Warriors. Seriously, it's a great movie. You should go watch it. And they were warriors come out to play. I'm sorry, you guys. I'm sorry. But so the thing is that they're all out in the streets, and it's like these gangs constantly fighting each other. And so this created like massive amounts of like sort of social and civil instability. People are afraid. And if people are fighting each other in the street and the government can't stop it, then the government looks to be ineffective. Okay. And then, still on the right. The thing is that there was more opposition from the right than the left, actually. We have the army. And so there's debate that, anyway, I'll get to that in just a little bit, right? So the army did actually help the Weimar Republic survive in the earliest days, especially against leftist revolts. So the army came out to help at the Spartacist Revolt, and as you know from having done your work on the previous things, there was an alliance, essentially, that the military decided to ally itself with Ebert at the beginning. And so it was the beginning of not a beautiful friendship, actually. The other problem in terms of the army being a wholehearted supporter of this new democratic government is that 21% of the officers were from the nobility, and the vast majority of those were Junker class, were the traditional landed aristocracy of Prussia. So again, you see this kind of desire to go back to the Wilhelmine system, and a group of people who want to preserve their traditional way of life. And so during the cap push, they wouldn't act against the Free Corps, right? So a lot of these are Freikorps. A lot of these were former military themselves. And so against the left, the army was willing to step in, but against the right, they totally were not. And so one of the things, of course, to remember is that the next president after Ebert, Hindenburg, was a former military general. So that hopefully gives you a little idea of what might have been going on. And our dude, Hidden or Haydn or Bob or John, as Max spent hours looking up, in 1974 basically said that the army would tolerate the Republic for the time being in its own interests. So basically he was just saying that the army was just going to hang out and support Ebert and support the government as long as the policies were in the interests of the army. And okay, so that's what Haydn says, or Hidden or Bob, whatever. But the other thing is that there is also debate as to whether or not you can count the army as being on the right. Whether instead of left and right, we have a third node that includes the army. Okay. All right, so let's look at the Spartacist Revolt, which happened in the early days of the first couple of weeks of January 1919. And I know we're jumping around a little bit, but it's actually kind of better to present it thematically, because generally instead of chronologically, because when you write, when you answer questions, the questions tend to be more thematic rather than chronological. So anyway, that's how I roll, yo. That's how I roll. And so you have to roll that way too. Whoop, whoop. All right. So the Spartacist Revolt was a communist attempt to seize power before the democratic elections. So the Republic has been declared, and in January they're going to have elections to basically set up the government. And it's this government that is later on in the spring going to finish writing the Constitution. So these guys try to take over and kind of create a communist state before they have a chance to establish democracy. And you can consider it the tail end, the last little bit of the November revolutions that overthrew the Kaiser. And this was a spontaneous revolt. Initially, we say it's a communist revolt, but it began spontaneously by workers who basically, by the time you get to this point, the Treaty of Versailles has not yet come down the pipe, essentially, right? And Germany is still being blockaded. So people are having, blockaded by Britain. So people are having difficulty eating, working, no money. The Spanish flu is raging. People are dying. And, you know, I mean, because they have poor nutrition at this time, they're more vulnerable. So this is a really, really rough time. And so it began spontaneously. And then because it's the workers, the communists were like, yeah, let us get in on this action. And so basically this spread through all major cities of Germany, right? And so they blocked streets. There were general strikes by more than 500,000 workers. So an economy that was already kind of dragging in the mud basically comes to a standstill. And then, the government had to accept help from a private militia to kind of put it down. And this private militia also comes in with the government because these guys were former soldiers, right? They were basically decommissioned soldiers, and as we know, military inherently on the right, yada yada blah blah. And so this is bad news for the government. Bad news. Basically, they totally do not have control of any of the systems of the government. And so they have to get outside help. And so, look, if you need somebody else to come in and enforce your will, it does not look good for you. And this is happening pretty much as soon as the election, so it's kind of throwing things out of whack as well. And so the Freikorps join because they basically, as they are on the right and nationalists, the communists are their natural enemies. This is not because they support democracy. This is not because they support the Weimar Republic. It is because they hate the communists. All right. So a lot of these guys basically still had their weapons, even though they were decommissioned. I guess, well, that kind of sounds kind of bad when you say decommissioned, but they were no longer active military, but they still had their weapons. And so President Ebert basically ordered them to go and put this down, and they killed a crap ton of people. And amongst the people they killed were the leaders of the Communist Party. And so, dun dun dun, they will vow revenge. And so here we have a recruitment poster for the Freikorps. So this was a historical tradition. Having Freikorps was a historical tradition in Germany. But the character is going to change. It's going to become like a lot more militant and really violent. And so we have numerous of these groups, a lot of these groups forming all throughout Germany, as you have disaffected soldiers, people who are unhappy that they lost, people who basically they had been told that they were winning as well. And the other thing is they're coming back to a world in which they don't fit in, right? The military of Germany has to be drastically reduced. These guys, especially if they were permanent members, if they were professional soldiers as part of the standing army, had basically no other skills. And so we also have a devastated economy. So essentially you have people trying to maintain a way of understanding, trying to create a world, a military world in the civilian world that they can fit into. Right? And then the other thing is that they're also going to try to be seeking some sort of redress for the dispute. And so they were generally anti-Republican, so anti-democracy, and anti-communist. Again, these are two things that they hate. They hate the government for basically throwing in the towel and losing the war, and they hate the communists because, well, why not? No, ideology and stuff. All right. And then also, even also consider that the Social Democrats are themselves leftists. Not as leftist as the communists, but still leftists. And so these guys, and this is one of the problems with the government, right? The Freikorps received help from the defense minister. All right. So this is the government, because you couldn't change everything when you with this quote unquote revolution. You should think back to some of the historiography that we presented about this. Then it's going to be really hard for the Democrats, for the Social Democrats to take control. So the defense minister supported them, and they were deployed to help quell some of the various insurrections. By the way, that is a kind of terrible Star Trek movie, but I love it anyway. So, y'all know that you want to hear me talk some more about some things that deal with some things. So I will. So looking at the political blah, 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 obstacles and problems continues in the next one with more of some of the political challenges that the Weimar faced. So until next time, I will, or I won't, but you will hear me again.